The train was already pulling away. My heart hammered in my chest as I sprinted down the dark platform, my only way home disappearing into the night. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and rusted metal, the kind of heavy, humid air that seemed to push against me as I ran. My sneakers slapped against the slick stone tiles, my lungs burned, and I could hear the low, rhythmic churn of the train wheels gaining speed. A deep sense of dread clawed up my spine. I was too far, too slow. And as the red taillights of the last carriage blurred into the darkness, the truth hit me like a slap. I was alone. Alone, in the middle of the night, in a place I couldn't name, surrounded by people whose language I couldn't understand, thousands of miles from home. Hours earlier, the plan had seemed straightforward enough. The Rajdhani Express would take me from Chennai to Delhi, a 24-plus-hour ride, but after the chaos of the last few days, flooded streets, an airport closure, and the frustration of cancelled flights, it had felt like a lifeline. I'd boarded at Chennai Central under the high, arched iron ceiling, the air rich with the scent of frying snacks, engine oil, and the faint sharpness of monsoon rain. I'd found my berth, settled in with my backpack tucked beneath my knees, and stared out the window as the station lights blurred into the night. The rhythm of the train, the metallic shudder of the wheels, and the occasional blast of the horn had been oddly hypnotic. Somewhere in those first few hours, I'd begun to drift in and out of sleep, lulled by the swaying carriage and the soft clink of teacups from the pantry car. Outside, the monsoon's grip had loosened, and the rain came in sporadic bursts, spattering against the glass. The air inside the compartment was warm and faintly musty, the scent of damp fabric and old upholstery clinging to everything. I'd press my forehead to the cool metal wall by the window, letting my mind wander between the strangeness of this journey and the comfort of having a ticket to where I needed to be. It must have been well past midnight when I felt the train slow. At first, it was just a subtle change in the vibration beneath my feet, a stretching pause in the rhythm of the wheels. Then the scenery outside shifted, station lights appearing in the distance, growing brighter until we pulled alongside a narrow platform under a canopy of corrugated metal. The lighting was uneven, a few tube lights flickering in that erratic way that makes everything feel a little haunted. The platform was quiet, almost eerily so, the stillness broken only by the occasional clatter of metal somewhere in the dark. I didn't know why we'd stopped, and for a moment I debated staying put. But the stiffness in my legs and the strange pull of curiosity won out. My sneakers touched the platform and immediately picked up the cool dampness from the stone, the smell of wet earth rising around me. I glanced at the shadows stretching across the ground, shapes of men squatting near piles of sacks, others moving slowly under the dim glow of the lamps. Somewhere farther down the platform, the faint hiss of a chai kettle drifted toward me, bringing with it the comforting scent of spiced tea and boiled milk. I only meant to walk a few steps, maybe stretch and take in the night air before climbing back aboard. But then I noticed the way the air here felt different, cooler, fresher than the stagnant warmth inside the carriage. My feet carried me a little farther, past a stack of wooden crates, past a wall with peeling paint the color of old mustard. The station itself seemed to be half asleep, caught between the long sigh of one train leaving and the slow anticipation of another arriving. It happened fast, so fast that I didn't process it until it was too late. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. The train, my train, shuddered forward, the heavy coupling clanking between cars. I turned sharply, disbelief tightening my chest. The wheels rolled, slowly at first, then faster. I ran. My shoes slipped slightly on the damp stone, my backpack thudding against my spine with every stride. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, and the night air seemed to thicken around me as if trying to hold me back. I reached out instinctively toward the nearest carriage, but my hand grasped only air. The platform stretched on ahead of me, empty, while the train carried on into the darkness. The silence, after it disappeared, was almost unbearable. My pulse pounded in my ears, the stillness of the station suddenly oppressive. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, though I couldn't see most of the faces clearly in the dim light. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then fell silent again. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the residue of the trains passing, mingled with the earthy dampness of the monsoon-soaked ground. My mind spun through 100 impossible thoughts at once. My luggage still on that train, my phone charger, my passport. Everything I owned for this trip was gone, rattling farther away with every second. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a physical force. I was stranded. I didn't know the name of this station, couldn't read the signs posted in looping Tamil script, couldn't even ask for help in the local language. I'd read stories before, dark, unsettling ones, about foreign women alone in unfamiliar places, and the edges of those headlines started to creep into my mind. My throat tightened, and a tremor began in my hands, spreading until I felt it in my knees. The humidity clung to my skin like a second layer, sticky and oppressive, amplifying the rush of panic building in my chest. Somewhere in the shadows, a group of men moved closer. Their shapes emerged under the pale light, thin shirts sticking to their backs, their sandals slapping against the wet ground. They spoke quickly to one another, the cadence of their voices sharp and unfamiliar to my ears. I stood frozen, my mind grasping for something to do, some way to make sense of the fact that my only connection to safety had just vanished into the night. The men's voices seemed to grow louder as they drew nearer, though I couldn't make out a single word. Their expressions were unreadable in the half-light, and every step they took toward me sent another wave of anxiety surging through my body. My mind kept reaching for familiar cues, gestures, tones, any fragment of English, but found nothing. The language barrier felt like an unscalable wall, leaving me trapped on one side with fear pressing in from all directions. The station itself seemed to close around me, its narrow platform lined with dark shapes of parked freight cars and sagging piles of burlap sacks, casting long shadows that danced with each flicker of the tube lights above. The air carried a damp heaviness, thick with the scent of stagnant water pooling somewhere near the edge of the tracks, and underneath it all was the faint but constant perfume of chai and fried snacks drifting from somewhere deep within the station. I became aware of my own breathing, shallow, fast, almost ragged. My hands, slick with sweat, clenched uselessly at my sides. My sneakers, damp from the platform surface, made me feel rooted and unsteady at the same time. In the distance, a ceiling fan turned lazily in the station's small waiting hall, its blades warped and coated in a thin layer of dust, as though even it had surrendered to the sluggish weight of the monsoon night. I wanted to move, to put space between myself and the approaching group, but my legs seemed locked in place by a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. From somewhere beyond them, another figure appeared, a man in a pressed but slightly rumpled uniform, the gleam of his name badge catching the erratic light. His arrival stirred something in the group around me. They shifted their attention toward him, speaking rapidly, gesturing in my direction. The man, who I would later learn was the station master, looked at me with a furrowed brow, his gaze scanning me in a way that felt both official and uncertain. I caught the brief glint of recognition in his eyes, recognition not of me, but of my foreignness. His words were deliberate, slower than the rest, but still impenetrable to my ears. The attempt at communication only deepened my helplessness. I could feel my throat tightening, the sharp burn of tears rising without my permission. The space between each sound, each unfamiliar syllable, seemed to stretch into eternity. My thoughts spiraled, circling around the image of my luggage hurtling farther away on the train, my passport locked inside, my phone charger, even the small comfort of my own clothes. Every part of me was telling me I was in danger, not from the people themselves, perhaps, but from the sheer void of understanding, from the isolation that came with being an outsider in a place where even the signs felt like a code I could never break. It was then, in the midst of that tightening spiral of fear, that movement caught my eye. From the far end of the platform, two figures emerged from the shadows, a woman in a simple sari, her steps measured and steady despite the uneven stones, and beside her, a girl of perhaps 12 years old. The girl's hair was pulled back neatly, the edge of her dress brushing her knees as she walked, and even at a distance, there was something deliberate in the way she moved, calm, unhurried, as though she carried with her the answer to a question I hadn't yet asked. Instinct moved me before reason did. My feet carried me toward them, my steps uneven and quick, cutting through the humid air like a swimmer desperate to break the surface. The closer I came, the more I saw the faint sheen of perspiration on the woman's brow, the soft but sturdy way her hand rested on the girl's shoulder, guiding her forward. My heart was still pounding, but now its rhythm was mixed with something else, a flicker of hope, fragile but insistent. When I reached them, the woman's eyes met mine, and in that moment, the noise of the platform seemed to recede. I tried to force words out, fragmented explanations, the only ones I could manage, but my voice trembled, my breath catching between phrases. My mind was still clinging to the image of the train vanishing into the dark, and each attempt at explaining felt like trying to describe a nightmare while still inside it. The air was thick, almost hard to breathe, carrying the mingled scents of wet concrete, iron, and something faintly floral from the woman's sari. Then, clear and steady, came a sound that sliced through the fog in my head. English. Not the halting, broken syllables I'd been bracing for, but fluent, assured words that grounded me instantly. They came from the girl, her voice soft yet certain, a lifeline in the middle of the chaos. In that instant, the tension that had been holding my body rigid began to loosen, replaced by the sudden weight of relief. My vision blurred, not from fear this time, but from the release of it. The next moments unfolded in a haze of motion and sensation. The station master, now no longer a distant figure but a man with a family, with a daughter who could bridge the vast gap between us, stepped into action. His gestures became purposeful, his presence less like an obstacle and more like a shield. Through the girl's translations, arrangements were made. My luggage would be removed from the train at the next major stop and kept safe until it could be collected. For the first time since stepping off the train, I felt a plan beginning to take shape, something concrete to hold on to amid the fluid uncertainty of the night. They guided me away from the exposed platform and into a small office off the main hall. The space smelled faintly of paper and dust, the air cooler here but still touched by the lingering dampness outside. A ceiling fan whirred steadily overhead, its sound a kind of low, mechanical heartbeat. Someone brought me a steel tumbler of water, the metal cool against my palm, and I drank deeply, my throat raw from the thick, humid air. A moment later, a plate of food appeared, simple, fragrant, carrying the warmth of something prepared at home. I ate slowly, my stomach still knotted, but the flavors, spiced, earthy, alive, cut through the fog of adrenaline that had been keeping me on edge. At some point, a neatly folded sari was placed in my hands, the fabric soft and smelling faintly of soap. My shorts and damp top suddenly felt exposed, out of place against the modest rhythms of this place. Changing into the sari was awkward, my unfamiliar hands clumsy with the pleats, but the woman's quiet, practiced assistance turned the moment into something unexpectedly comforting. Wrapped in the bright, flowing fabric, I felt both disguised and accepted, my foreignness softened at the edges by their kindness. The night stretched on in a series of impressions rather than a clear timeline, as though my sense of time had dissolved somewhere between the departing train and the small office where I now sat. Outside, the monsoon pressed against the station with a persistent, unrelenting weight, each gust of damp wind carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the metallic tang of the tracks. I could hear the faint, rhythmic tap of rain on the corrugated roof above, a sound that was both soothing and strangely foreign in this context. The station's activity quieted after midnight, but it never truly stopped. There was always the shuffle of feet on the platform, the distant hum of voices in a language I couldn't follow, and the occasional, almost ghostly horn of a passing freight train in the dark. The sari clung lightly to my skin, its fabric breathing in a way my travel clothes hadn't. It wasn't just a change of garments, it was a kind of unspoken message, a gesture of protection that extended beyond the fabric itself. The woman's kindness, so measured and unassuming, had given me something I hadn't expected to feel again that night: dignity. The fear that had hollowed me out earlier was still there, lingering at the edges, but it had been tempered by a new awareness, one that recognized the safety of being folded into someone else's care, even if only temporarily. The girl remained close, an anchor in a sea of unfamiliarity. Her English bridged the chasm between my panic and the station master's calm instructions, and with each exchange, I understood more about what was being set into motion on my behalf. My luggage, I was told, would be taken off the train at a larger junction up the line and held for retrieval by colleagues in Delhi. My company had been contacted. Someone there would meet the luggage when it arrived. The plan was to get me as far as Gwalior by morning, where flights to Delhi were still operating despite the weather disruptions in Chennai. I remember sitting in the office as the station master finalized the arrangements, his pen moving steadily over a worn ledger book, the nib occasionally scratching against the paper in a way that seemed impossibly precise for such a chaotic night. His mother, the woman in the sari, stepped in and out of the room, her presence marked by the soft rustle of fabric and the quiet clink of steel utensils as she prepared tea. The girl sat beside me, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, but always watchful. I wondered how often she had been the interpreter between two worlds, and how many travelers like me she had helped without even realizing the weight of her role. At some point, they offered me a place to rest in a small room off the back of the station. The cot was narrow, the blanket thin, but the simple fact of having a place to lie down made my body feel impossibly heavy. The air smelled faintly of incense, probably left over from some earlier ritual, and there was a small window, its frame warped from years of monsoons, that let in a sliver of the damp night air. I didn't sleep deeply. My mind was still too alert, replaying the night's events in a looping sequence, but I drifted in and out, lulled by the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant echo of announcements on the platform. When dawn broke, it did so without ceremony. The sky was a muted gray, the light diffused by thick clouds that promised more rain. The station stirred awake in a way that felt both organic and sudden. Chai vendors calling out softly, the hiss of boiling milk, the clatter of metal cups being rinsed in buckets of water. The platform was slick, reflecting the pale morning light in shimmering patches. Wrapped still in the borrowed sari, I felt less conspicuous than I had in my shorts and t-shirt, though I was aware that my presence was still marked by the pale foreignness of my skin and the awkwardness of my movements. The station master, his mother, and the girl accompanied me to the edge of the platform where a different train awaited, one that would take us north toward Gwalior. They didn't just send me off, they traveled with me, positioning themselves as a buffer between me and the unpredictable chaos of the journey. It was an act that went beyond duty, rooted in something deeper, something I could only call humanity in its purest form. The hours that followed were a blend of stillness and motion. Outside the window, the Indian countryside rolled by in long, green stretches broken by bursts of color, women in bright saris walking along dirt paths, fields shimmering with water from the rains, clusters of houses with walls painted in soft blues and pinks. Occasionally, we would pass through small stations where the platform buzzed with life, children darting between vendors, porters balancing impossible loads on their heads, the air thick with the mingling aromas of food and diesel. Inside our compartment, there was a quiet rhythm, the steady sway of the train, the muted conversations in Hindi between the family, the occasional translation from the girl to let me know where we were or how much farther we had to go. When we finally reached Gwalior, the transition from train to station to airport was almost seamless, though I knew it had only been made possible by their careful planning. At the small airport, the station master shook my hand, firm, deliberate, and his mother placed a hand briefly on my arm, her eyes warm with a wordless kindness. The girl smiled in a way that carried both reassurance and a quiet pride, as though she understood exactly what she had done for me, and perhaps for other travelers before me. The flight to Delhi felt strangely short after the long, tangled night. By the time I reached Gurgaon and was met by my colleagues, the fear of being stranded had receded into something else entirely, a story, vivid and layered, that I knew I would carry with me long after the immediate relief had faded. I kept thinking about the moment when I first heard the girl's English, how that small thread of familiarity had pulled me back from the edge of panic and into the safety of connection. Later, sitting in my hotel room, I began to write it all down. Not just for myself, but for others who might one day find themselves in a place where language fails and fear rushes in to fill the gap. I wanted to tell them that sometimes, rescue comes not in grand gestures or official channels, but in the form of a borrowed sari, a plate of home-cooked food, and a 12-year-old girl whose voice can cut through the noise of an unfamiliar night to say, simply, "It's okay."
Thanks for watching. If the story meant something to you, consider subscribing. We've got more like this, stories that don't ask for sympathy, just honesty.